Hi, everybody. You are listening to Judging Meghan with your host, Meghan Judge. So today is going to be a heavy episode. I'm going to start there. This time of year is really, really challenging for people that could be dealing with loss, grief. I know for me, I'm going to bring myself into this quickly because I love to talk about myself. Jamy and Vanessa already like, okay. When I was a kid and I lost my dad at 13, he died of leukemia. And I remember those first holidays were just really hard. I remember thinking, I don't even want to celebrate Christmas that first year. And so everything changed after that. And the thing is, if you are listening right now, listeners, and you're really dealing with heavy things like loss, or you've lost a parent or a spouse or a child, God forbid, one day at a time, 1 second at a time, do your freaking best, put your shoes on in the morning, cry, eat whatever you want to eat, drink whatever you want to drink. I mean, not seriously, but whatever you need to do right now to get through this time. And that's my advice. And a doctor, if you're listening, could probably be like, that's the worst advice ever. Well, I'm sorry, but that's what we're going to do. And that's how you roll through the holidays when you're grieving. Thank God I'm not a licensed physician, because nobody would listen to me. We've all been put here for a reason, and we all deserve acceptance.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.
I'm a trauma survivor from a really young age, and I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD in the past few years. I've been surrounded by death and abuse much of my life. I've been dragged through the mud and have been to the point of not wanting to go on anymore. Through my interviews with other survivors, I've learned that there is a way out. From recovering to surviving and thriving, we all have the strength to come out the other side.
You are listening to Judging Meghan.
Everyone, I want to welcome to the podcast Jamy Lapointe and Vanessa Fields. I almost butchered your name, and you already told me that 2 seconds ago, Jamy. I know, I'm so bad at this. It's sometimes I get scripts and I read them and I'm just horrible at it. Anyway, thank you both so much for coming on. I know that this is a tricky and hard thing to talk about. But like I said, it's really important that you share these stories about your husband and wife, because you're going to help someone out there. And that's, at the end of the day, I feel like when you share your stories, that's the best thing you can do in life, because it truly will help you, and it's going to help other people too. So with that being said, I would like to say welcome again. And we're just going to kind of go into your stories, because I think that it has a really amazing kind of ending. But we'll talk about, this is still fresh grief, fresh loss for both of you. But what I love about your stories is that it kind of gives other people hope out there. And that's right. What we really need is hope at the end of the day. So Vanessa, I'm going to start with you. I would love to start. I always ask every guest that comes on where you're from. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I'm from California. I grew up in Valencia, California, just an hour north of where we're at currently. And I grew up just in not too much of a small town, but, in a great family. I have 2 younger sisters, mom and dad, who are now not together, but still good friends. We spend all holidays together. Grew up in the same house my entire life until, I decided to leave the nest. And then I've been in South Bay now for going on 14 years.
Which is a long time. That's like me. We're almost twins to the dates that we've been here. For listeners everywhere, just so you know, and I do want to give a shout out to Helena, who's a mutual friend of ours who introduced us. So the South Bay, I talk about this all the time. We live outside of LA in the bubble. We call it the bubble. I live in Manhattan Beach. And we're very fortunate to live in this area. It's really beautiful, right? But that's what the South Bay is for people that are listening. So go on.
So yeah, I moved down here. I worked in fashion apparel like my whole life. And so I moved down here for a job offer, and then I never wanted to leave. And I stayed in that industry really until I had my first son, Jack, who is now 4. And at that time, it was going into COVID. I was pregnant. And so when I got pregnant, it was COVID and it was just everything going on, and times were really uncertain. So, at the time, my husband and I, Jason was my husband, we decided that I would just stay home. And once I had the baby, kind of be a stay-at-home mom for a year or two and then kind of figure it out. And so really it was a blessing in disguise for us at the time, because it was so wonderful to get to stay at home and be with the new baby. And, we're fortunate enough to have that. And then after Jack was about 2 years old, I had gone back to work in fashion with like a hybrid schedule. And Jason had just started his own company. So we had the flexibility. And then at that time, I found out I was pregnant right after I started a new job.
Okay. So tell me, you met Jason, I'm assuming in this area.
No. So funny enough, Jason and I actually went to high school together.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I hadn't known Jason since I was 15 years old, and I'm 38. So we had been friends, always just friends for a very long time. Jason had then moved down to South Bay to open a business or help somebody open a business. And we initially, he reached out over Facebook and was like, "Oh, I moved down to Manhattan Beach. Would you be interested in going to dinner?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm a local. I can show you, all the spots." So yeah, we went to dinner and there was no interest whatsoever. It was just like, "Okay, nice to see you. See you later." And then a year later, he reached out again and was like, "Hey, would you want to go to dinner again?" And we did. And I think timing, I'm a firm believer in timing's everything. Mm-hmm. And pretty much it was just quick, fast pace from there. So yeah, so I think it was nice, even being removed from where we both grew up, to have the familiarity of each other. Yeah. And the timing felt right. So it moved quickly. We got pregnant, got married, did all the things. But yeah, I think having that friendship built in made it really easy to, catapult our relationship into what it was.
And just so the listeners know, both Vanessa and Jamy lost their spouses. So that's part of what we're going to be sharing today. Can you tell me a little bit about the loss and how that happened?
Yeah. So we had gone up to, my dad lives in Lake Arrowhead. So again, just, a little bit outside of LA. So we went up there for Christmas with my whole family. I have a super small family. So we go up there every year since my dad's lived up there. And, we had gone up there, we're celebrating. And while we were up there, we knew that we were going to be coming home and moving into a new home. So in the back of our minds, we had been talking about okay, we need to come home, get the moving truck. Our whole house was boxed up really from the moment we had gone up there right around Christmas time. So we came home, we got the keys to our moving truck, got the keys to our house. And we had started moving in on December 27th. I'll never forget that date. And so we had started moving in, and while we were moving out, Jason was carrying a box and he was walking downstairs and he fell and the box landed on his stomach. I don't know, and I'll never know till this day, if that had anything to do with sending him into everything that went wrong. But the next day he had really started complaining that he was not feeling well. He started throwing up just nonstop, to the point he couldn't even walk. And so after 2 days of that, we were pretty concerned. And we're like, all right, we need to go to the ER. So we had gone to the ER out here at the hospital, and this was now New Year's Eve. So with the anticipation of like, it might be crazy, we were like, we're just going to go in. Luckily, Jason's mom had been down here helping us move because at this point he couldn't do anything. So now we had friends and family kind of getting word like, oh, Jason's not feeling well. Can people kind of come down and pitch in? So like I said, I had at the time, our 2-year-old was at home. So she was like, I'll stay home with the 2-year-old. You guys go to the hospital. So yeah, we had gone into the ER. Essentially, they just said like, it seems like you just have a bad stomach virus, like gastroenteritis. Mm-hmm. They put him on morphine. They ran a bunch of tests, obviously did all the blood work, and sent us home saying like, you just need to go home and rest. Here's pain pills. Here's like, anti-nausea medicine. And here's something for like the stomach cramping. So we're like, okay, thinking like, 'tis the season. We're here again. Like the flu's going around, stomach viruses are going around. We didn't really think much of it. We come home. Within 2 hours, Jason is back with very few words. He couldn't even talk, like hunched over telling me like, I am in so much pain. And Jason, I think like 90.9% of men was like, never went to the doctors, like that was the last place he'd ever want to be. So I knew something was wrong. I was like, okay, we just left the ER and now he's telling me he needs to go back. And just from my own experience, I like had said like, what is the level of pain? And he was like 10, like 10, 10, 10. So drove right back to the same hospital, right back to the ER. This time his mom actually took him. I stayed home with our son. So she had said, my daughter-in-law and my son were just here, and he's back with the same symptoms, but worse, like, can something be done? So they're like, okay, let's just get him back into a bed, put him back on a morphine. Really nothing more was done. He didn't get scoped, which now looking back, that's what a lot of people, like friends who are nurses and doctors said. Did he get scoped? No, he didn't. We didn't know to ask. So I'd say to any listeners, or if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're not getting the answers, you have to advocate for yourself. Mm-hmm. I think in any instance, it's unfortunate because I think we do have there's so much greatness with modern medicine and we are so lucky, but also they're humans and people make mistakes. And for Jason, I do feel like something was overlooked. I will always feel that way. Essentially, he spent the night in the ER, and while doctors came in and out of checking in on him, they just kept on morphine to keep the pain at bay. And even like his mom at one point had said to one of the nurses, like, something is wrong. Like, my son would never be in this much pain. Like, can something more be done? And he said, like, I think you're just causing him anxiety. And I think you just need to like step back and let like the morphine do the job and let the doctors do their job. So I think really for even us, we kind of felt like, okay, maybe we are overreacting. Maybe it is just like gastroenteritis. So inevitably in the morning, what ended up happening was Jason spoke to a doctor, came into the room, and they had said, we really don't see anything wrong. We've done an ultrasound, we've done x-rays, we don't see anything. So all we can do is we can admit you into a room, but just keep like your pain at bay and try to watch it. So Jason was a very stubborn man. So what ended up happening was me and his mom were two ships passing. She was coming back home to be with my son. I was driving to the hospital. During that time, Jason took out his IVs and decided to leave the hospital. So I literally picked him up like on the side of the street, leaving the hospital. And he thought this whole time he just had to go home and like go to the bathroom. He was very regular. And as silly as that sounds, he felt like, I am just constipated. Like, I need to go home. I need to get into a hot bath, and just take a break, take a breather. He came home. So now it's New Year's Day, and he The throwing up had subsided. We got to basically that night and we were laying in bed together. It was about 11:30 p.m. And at the time I was 26 weeks pregnant. And it's kind of like, it always will make me emotional, but it's not funny. But we were laying in bed, and at the time we knew we were having a boy, but we hadn't decided a name yet. So the last thing Jason had said to me was, I'm going to go take a shower. Good night. I love you. And rubbed my belly and was like, good night, Cooper. He had wanted to name him Cooper. And it was like kind of this push and pull of me saying like, stop calling the baby that. We haven't decided on a name. Mm-hmm. You better believe I named him Cooper, obviously. But Jason got up to get in the shower. And I heard, so we were in a bedroom. Again, mind you, we had just moved in, so there's boxes everywhere. Our bedroom was a bedroom, like open concept with the bathroom leading into the bedroom. So I heard the shower turn on. My back was to the shower. And within like 2 minutes, I just heard a bang, like a thud. And I looked over and Jason wasn't on the floor, but he was wedged in between the door and our bedroom. And, yeah, when I got up, that's just like, I think Jamy and I have shared, if you ever experience someone dying or going into cardiac arrest, there's a look in their eyes that I will never, ever forget. I didn't know what was happening. You know, my first thought was like, is he ODing from what he just got sent home? Like the Norco and the anti-nausea medicine? Like I immediately checked. It was sitting right there on the counter. I was like, no, this is full. He's maybe taken one. But I could not comprehend like what was happening. So, he had only even taken his shirt off, like to get into the shower. So again, luckily his mom had spent the night. So she was downstairs. So I just immediately called her upstairs and she just knew. She's like, we have to start CPR, call 911. So I had pulled Jason's legs from under him to get him flat to start CPR. And, yeah, it was just something I'll never forget. I was calling on 2 different phones, his phone and my phone, 911, and that had taken what felt like an eternity to get a hold of, but it really, I think in total was like 3 minutes, but I finally got 911 on the phone and they pulled up outside. And I just remember, like at the time, I think when something's so heavy happens like that, I'm thinking like there's too many paramedics and firefighters in our house. I don't want them to wake up the 2-year-old. And oddly enough, while I'm bringing the firefighters and paramedics upstairs, I can hear Jason start talking. He wasn't breathing. We had to start doing CPR. So while I'm bringing them up, I hear Jason start talking again, saying like, Mom, I'm fine. Why did you call 911? I'm okay. So I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, thank God. Did I overreact? Should I have called 911? I'm just thinking like, thank God he's okay. So they sit him up. They're asking questions. They too were like, they performed like Narcan twice on him, thinking like maybe he's ODing. And I was like, no, absolutely not. He's not ODing. There was no pills, nothing. So they asked him a round of a few questions, his name, his birthday. By the time they got to like the 3rd question, he was like, eyes were rolling back in his head. So they loaded him up in the ambulance and I did not get in the ambulance. I saw, when they loaded him up, his head was moving. I saw he was having a conversation with one of the paramedics. So in my gut feeling, I was like, okay, he's okay. Like he needs to get to the hospital and get medical attention, but he's going to be okay. So his mom had said, I'm going to follow them to the hospital. You make sure your Jack is okay. And then come meet us at the hospital as soon as my sister was going to come over. So I said, okay. So I'm going in. My sister's on her way down to take over with our son. And as I'm like packing a bag, Renee had called me and said, okay, the doctor's about to come in. I'm going to have you on speakerphone. And so she came in and the doctor, I could tell, was just frantic and said, I am so sorry. I'm doing everything I can to keep your son and husband alive. I have to get back in there, but it's not looking good. And that just like made me fall to the floor because I just, again, was like, wait, he just left in the ambulance and I saw him talking and like, how? And so I got to the hospital and Jason had gone into cardiac arrest twice in the ambulance. He got shocked twice. They got him back. And then we were waiting for the surgeon to get there because all they knew was that he was full of blood and it wasn't coming out. And so his stomach was getting pumped full of blood, but they didn't know why. So essentially he went into surgery and they determined that Jason had a perforated ulcer that went through his stomach, perforated through his stomach, and sent him into septic shock. And I don't know how. We'll never know how or why. All the things. Jason wasn't drinking. Jason, it's not family related. People always ask, was he really stressed? And I'd say like no more than the normal average person. Honestly, if I'm being completely honest, things had never been better for us. He had started a business, financially was doing good. We had our son at home. I was back to work. We had the baby on the way. We had just moved into a brand new place that we were super excited about. So
Can I just say something? Because I've been silent this whole time, just like the listeners and Jamy sitting there. I know you know this story, and it's got to be because you've gone through your own thing, Jamy. Just like no matter how many times you tell a story like this, Vanessa, it's hard. And when you told some of the story, which is be your own advocate, I'm just going to tell you really briefly why I think this is so important. And I try to spread this as well. So my best friend died, and she went to give birth to my godson, and they didn't connect the tubes for her. And I hate telling the story to new moms that might be like pregnant, but they didn't connect the tubes, and a virus, airborne like strep virus, got into the tubes and her brain swelled. And same thing, like her husband, Chris, who's like my dear friend for years and years, Julie's husband. And this happened like 21 years ago. He knew there was something wrong. Okay. And he was like telling them there's something wrong. And they were too busy. So, you just shared that whole story, but I do want to say a point that you said is, please, listeners, please be your own advocate. Be your own advocate. Doctors are people too. They make mistakes. They make mistakes every day. We're all human beings. Like we just are. So you always go with your gut. Who cares if the doctor hates you? Okay. Yeah. They're people too. And if they do hate you, ask for another doctor. I cannot reiterate that enough, because if my best friend, who was like my whole world, would have, if they would have just listened to her and her husband, she would still be here. So just please know that, listeners. And I just wanted to reiterate that. The other thing I was going to say is, as you shared the story, which is so horrifically tragic in itself, but just not understanding what was going on, and that feeling of being in shock when you're losing somebody and your hands are tied, but your brain cannot comprehend what to do. Right? I know both of you get this. Your brain cannot comprehend what to do. Like, is this real life? Is this can't be happening, right? This cannot be happening right now. Right. It's a really horribly horrific feeling. And then I don't even know what else to say except like, I have to believe like there's a reason for all of this, because otherwise it's like such freaking bullshit, right? Yeah. I'm sorry, but it is. It's a bunch of freaking bullshit that this would happen, and that we're like, kind of like, okay, this series of events happens, and it just breaks my heart. It just absolutely breaks my heart. And I know we just met, but I'm like so freaking proud of you that you just shared that story.
Yeah.
And I know Jamie's sitting next to you. And I mean, I would not have been able to share my story about Julie a year later and kept it together. I still freaking can't. So you haven't seen me ugly cry, and it is literally not attractive. So go back and look at some video, and I can tell you, not cute.
I don't ugly cry beautiful either.
Well, nobody does, except
nobody
for
does.
like, I don't actually know. Nobody does. Let's be real.
Yeah. That's why they coined it the term, I guess.
Yeah. So tell me, I know that was a lot to share, and thank you for being like sharing it that way. Cause I know it was hard to tell everyone the story, but can you kind of like tell me like the aftermath briefly? And then, you know, I hate like being like, okay, tell me your story about somebody dying. And then I'm like, Jamie, let's hear yours next. But like, what I want to say is it's so horrifically sad to hear this, but then at the same time, like losing your husband that way. And he was so young. How young was he?
Well, and that's, I mean, not even to, I know it's hard for me to condense this story because it's so long, but he then survived then for 26 days in the ICU.
Oh, he did. Okay. I thought, sorry to interrupt. I thought that's how, okay.
No, don't be sorry.
Okay.
No, I'm so glad you brought to the point of advocating. But yeah, I mean, so then he had surgery and then he went into the ICU for 26 days. And at that point, it was a plethora of an anoxic brain injury, a stroke. I mean, literally his head to his toes. And that, I mean, when we first got in, they had said like, he's probably going to lose some toes because, you know, at this point there's been no blood flow, which I was like, fine, he can walk without toes, you know, that's fine. No problem. But every day it was more bad news. And I don't know if you've ever experienced, or to your listeners, like when you're in the ICU, which I had it, this is my first real grief experience other than like a grandparent dying, which is sad, yes, but different, you know? And so every day in the ICU, they do at least usually 2 rounds, and where the doctors just go around to every single room. And it's so, every single day I just felt I was like, they were saying like action, and I was in a movie, you know?
Yeah.
It's like I stand there at the door just waiting to see like, what's today's news? What does it hold? You know, what's the game plan? And ultimately, he got out, you know, he was on 5 pressors, which is literally 5 maxed out life support pressors in the ICU. But there were times where in the ICU, I would play him videos of our son, and that was the only time I got him to squeeze my hand or turn his head towards me. And that, I think, alone is a sign, you know. I held on to that with every ounce of my being. But ultimately, he went septic again. And the day he died was very traumatic. It was nothing but peaceful. I wish it was different, but standing there now 30 weeks pregnant, and I mean, the doctor was pumping his chest, you know, literally tears onto his chest. And the room was filled with so many people who had been there, all the nurses, you know, throughout those 26 days that had been so supportive. And just now I've like almost built this relationship with them, you know, because I spent the night in the hospital every single night. We took shifts, but for the most part, if it wasn't me, his mom or brother, we were there straight for those 26 days, which again, they say too, like you can get like depression just from being in the ICU because it is a dark, dark, cold, lonely place.
Yeah.
But
do you feel like, I mean, I didn't realize that he lived the additional 26 days because my big mouth couldn't shut up. But do you feel like he, like by the time you knew, like there was almost like he was being called? I don't know if both of you are spiritual. I talk a lot about spirituality. I am. I've got to believe that there's something after this. I'm sorry, but I do.
Yeah, there has to.
Right?
I hope.
Yeah. Well, if there's not, I'm going to be really, really angry, and I'm going to start a fight with someone. Somewhere. I don't know.
We'll really have a podcast then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely, I took a lot of videos while Jason was in the ICU, and I'd be lying if I said I don't go back to those often and look at them. And looking back at them, I don't think his soul was there. His body, yes, was there. But just certain things, when I go back and really, really look at everything without being too graphic, I think that, I think he had already gone to another place, and
it was he was ready to say goodbye, although you obviously weren't, and you're sitting there pregnant, which is a totally separate episode. I might have to have you back on, because I don't even know. You hear these stories of other human beings and you're like, how do you do it? And I'm sure because you lived it, you just do it, right? You don't have any other choice.
Yeah, I think that was a moment I will hold on to and never ever forget. But I had this very hard realization because inevitably what ended up happening was he coded 3 different times the day he died. And ultimately the doctor had said, Vanessa, you have to make the call. Do you want me to keep going? And I just remember standing there, what felt like I was in quicksand. I couldn't even get the words out and vocalize. But I remember just saying enough, he's done. And, I obviously just spent time alone with him in the room. But I think one of the most surreal and sad feelings, but beautiful feelings, was kissing him goodbye while Cooper was in my stomach kicking at that point and moving all around. That's just something that can never be explained. And even that feeling, until you're in it, you just, I don't know, it was hard, but I was so thankful that he had given me 2 of the most beautiful sons in the world. I'm still every day so thankful. That's what's kept me going. Because I was having a real tough time the first year, which I know we'll get into all about that. But
I'm gonna kind of shift, and then we're gonna bring you back in, obviously. And Jamy, I'm sorry you have to follow that, because this is so heavy, and listeners, this is a heavy episode, like I said. But, Vanessa, I can't explain when I'm talking to you. I do believe in God and spirituality and all this stuff. And I just feel without me being obnoxious saying this to you, but your freaking husband's proud of you. And I know that you're a fighter. To go through all of these things that you've gone through, you did, and being pregnant and doing that alone, as a mom, and not having your husband there, you're a fighter. He's really proud of you, and I'm proud to know you. I know we just met, but I truly, truly am. And I know my listeners that are listening must be blown away by your story. So thank you for sharing that. And Jamy, I hate to put you on next. I feel kind of weird. Okay, bye, Vanessa. Let's bring Jamy in now. But the whole point of this is to share these stories to help you guys, listeners. And then I want you guys to know that there is an ending where we're going to work through this stuff, and it's going to, so let me ask you, Jamy, kind of a little bit about where you're from. And I want to find out about your wife and a little bit about that.
Sure. Thank you. And, thanks so much for having us on. So I'm Jamy. Lived in Canada growing up, 2 Air Force parents. So my mother and father, collectively 50 years in the Canadian Air Force. So I grew up sort of all over Canada, which was awesome. And, it led me to figuring out where I might consider going to school. I didn't really have any geographic spot where my family was. So I was just open, and I ended up going to school in New York just because I got a pretty solid financial aid package. And I was like, let's try something new, So I did that. And that was the kickstart to so many things, work, personal. So I met my wife in college, halfway through college. I was a sophomore and she was a senior. So we're in New York, both couple of small town kids, and we met and we bonded on that front.
Where what school? Do you mind me asking?
Manhattanville University.
Okay. I'm an East Coaster, so I had to ask that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've never heard of it. It's super small, but it was fun. Honestly, I would do it again. And yeah, she was from Connecticut. Kat was from Connecticut, so not too far, but still different. She was also a small town kid. We met, we dated, and figured out, she went on to be a big girl, graduated, and got a real job and everything. I was still a student for 2 more years, so that was an interesting couple of years. But, I graduated. We moved to Westport, Connecticut. Both got new jobs, and it was the start of a pretty amazing adult chapter, I would say. We were kids, obviously. But I was like, I don't even know where in Canada I would go back to. So let's just see what happens. Worked. Again, both got jobs in Connecticut. Eventually both got jobs in New York, commuting in from Connecticut. And ended up living in Stamford, Connecticut, almost 10 years, which was the longest place I'd ever spent in one place.
I used to live in Greenwich. I love Connecticut. Sorry, I had to say that.
Neighbors.
Beautiful place. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I had a lot of fun there. It's just a mix of everything you want it to be. So, except for, the cold, which we've alleviated now.
Yes.
Lived in Connecticut, working in New York. We bought our first home. It was fun. We were really making it happen. And she'd gone from Connecticut to New York. Yes, a change, back to Connecticut, Stamford. But she was itching for something different, So we met, we were at this impasse where I was finally comfortable enough. I had my circle, I had my network. I was, employed and everything. I was like, why would we sell our house and then change things again? And so I was a little stubborn on that front. But eventually I said, look, if we save up enough and someone, one of us gets some dreamboat offer, sure, whatever. It wouldn't have been more than 6 months until she got like the sweetest offer you could think of from her same company, offering her more money to come work remotely, but just be in charge in another state. Of course, she picks California. And I was like, wow. But we did it. We packed up. So within 2 weeks, the house sold. And we're on a plane out here staying in Manhattan Beach trying to find some apartment real fast, which is just a different beast out here, as I'm sure you know. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so moved 6 years ago now to California, also in the South Bay. We were immediately just in love with this place. It's such a cool, fun place. Whether you're a young family, young professionals, whatever it is, like there's a place for you here, and it's so fun, and the culture, and it's just easy to fall in love with. But not long after being here, because we thought we'd be house hunting by then and all that, and then boom, COVID. So like, okay, we'll hang out for a little while. But for us, unfortunately, it went from moving across the country to this small place, temporary ended up being almost 2.5 years. COVID pushed that timetable out a little further. And then, a couple years after COVID, we were like a lot of other people, like, okay, enough's enough. Like, we got to travel a little bit. Let's get ourselves back on track. And I'll never forget our friends that were neighbors in Hermosa Beach were getting married in Mykonos. And we're like, well, what better opportunity to get out of the house, go somewhere new. Let's tack on a big vacation. And, let's go have some fun. So we went and spent 2 weeks in Greece. And it was the greatest time. And I'm just forever thankful we did that, because that'll end up having been, some of the last normal time, if you will. Because we got back from the wedding and from Greece, and within a couple weeks, it's like stomach ache, and so a lot of similarities in terms of advocacy and everything else, right? So stomach ache turns into pain. And I'm like, okay, well, now we have to do something about this. So we called her GI doctor, made an appointment. Within a week, we had and we're at that age too. So it's like, let's just schedule the colonoscopies, endoscopies, GI appointments. Let's just go, get the checkups anyways. Might as well. I'll never forget, it was a couple days after she'd made the appointment, hadn't gone yet, but had made the appointment. We're at the beach with a bunch of friends, and this sudden, significant pain hits her. And I'm like, we're not just going to sit here and suffer through this. Let's make some phone calls, or let's go to the ER. You can choose. We went home. She calls the doctor. The doctor very simply says, I'll see you in a week, or at this point, 5 days or so. But if you want to go to the ER right now, you'll have all the scans. We can do, urgent scopes, whatever needs to be done. It'll get done today. So, your questions will at least be answered. So we're like, you know what? It's a Saturday. Whatever. Let's just go to the ER. So we went, and we're not there exactly off an ambulance. So no one's rushing us back. We eventually get seen, and then she's just waiting in this room for so long and so long and so long. We are. And this is one of the things that'll just hurt me forever because, Kat got her dog at the time, Peanut, and very quickly thereafter became our dog. And we were at the hospital 5-6 hours that day. So at this point, Peanut's 15 and a half years old. And she's like, you know what, just can you go home and let him out? She was just completely obsessed with Peanut. Can you go let him out? And I'm like, I'd rather not, we're here. This is way more important. If he pees in a house, it is what it is, But he was old and we were definitely worried about him. Let's just say that. But I'm like, you know what? I'll go home. I can go home and be back in half an hour. Of course, doctors, came and filled the room while I was in my truck on my way back to the hospital. But that's the moment that she learned that it was not a stomach ache. It was in fact stage 4 colon cancer. And, that jump is so dramatic, and it always feels like, what did we miss and for so long, So I wasn't even there. 5-10 minutes later, I arrive, and she's in shock, obviously. The doctors are all there trying to cushion the blow in terms of me walking into the room. But even this is kind of the trend as far as Kat goes. It was just kind of okay, so what are we going to do about it? And it was battle stations right from that moment. We went from the emergency room. She didn't even go home. She was consulted and brought up to the oncology floor. And they knew how bad it was and how sort of shocking it was. That the 2 ER doctors, which I'm extremely thankful, they pulled a lot of strings because I wasn't even allowed to go up as a guest onto the oncology floor because it's still COVID rules. But the administration and everyone got in touch and they said, you know what, just go. No one's going to, tell you otherwise. But within 24 hours, on her first cycle of chemo, which is just such a wild, thing to have accomplished within a day. But this is just how she operates, So of course, everyone's on planes at this point because no one expected this. To make matters sort of more complicated, we were a couple of weeks from closing on our house, this house that we're in right now, which is one of the interesting components of all of this, because the house she moved into when shit hit the fan for her and Jason.
Vanessa, we're talking about, sorry.
The house here.
Yeah.
That's 2 doors down from here.
No. That's okay. That's crazy.
We'll go back to that.
Okay. But I just had to say Vanessa because my listeners wouldn't have known because of what you're unless you're watching it. Can I interrupt you for 1 second? I'm so sorry. I have to say that. But the colon cancer thing is a huge, one of my very best friends from college lost her sister to colon cancer. Same kind of thing, came on out of nowhere. Was she, and I'm saying this for my listeners and myself who has to go get a colonoscopy. I know that. But they're saying to get them earlier. My question to you is, did she have any, was she having any issues, or did it just come on really quickly?
No.
So
the symptoms that were the obvious ones were the ones that we saw and sort of acted on in those couple of weeks.
So it was weeks.
GI.
She wasn't having like anything before the weeks, and it already was stage 4. Okay. Please, listeners, listen to that and get your colonoscopy. Yeah. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Listen, and not for anything else, she was extremely conscious about what she eats, what she does for a living. Very, very fit person, active. I was more of the problem on the diet side of things, but she was, she worked so hard to stay in line with that stuff. Mm-hmm. And for her to have her colon, so on day 1, her colon, her liver, and her lungs were just covered. And so, immediately there was no surgical avenue, because it needs to be a holistic approach. They needed to get control of everything before anything could be targeted. So right off the bat, radiation wasn't in play, nor was anything surgical. So that's why she just hopped in on chemo, because one of the things they did say to her, and it's the last time she ever asked about a timeline. But that day when we walked up to the oncology floor, the first doctor said, from what I'm seeing and how aggressive this particular type of cancer is, like, you might not make it to the holidays if you do nothing. And this was July.
So it was that. Yeah. It was, and, and for you, Jamy, like, to be in that position, I know both of you have share that, but to be told cancer, I'll bring myself into it. I remember as a kid being told cancer with my dad. I was 12 at the time. It's an awful, awful thing when you hear that. That was so quick too. How did you, what did you say? What did you do? Were you we're going to get through this? I have to ask that. Was her plan to just keep going and fight it? Or was she just, did they say you had very little hope? Tell me a little bit about that.
She, first of all, didn't entertain not acting on it. That's just very true to her nature. In terms of me, I was fortunate to feed off of her strength in those moments. And I don't mean that I needed it. It's just, she was so strong immediately and so just driven to figure something out. And that, even that day in the emergency room, and that dove into the whole, again, the advocacy thing. Are there other doctors? Are there other treatments? There's just so much out there, and every network has their protocol, and you have to ask the question. And it doesn't matter if you form these relationships with these doctors, you're not going to hurt someone's feelings. But these are all things we had to learn on the fly, because it all happened so fast. And we went from what felt like top of the world to just battle stations. So many cycles. She did 8 chemo cycles in the 5 months to follow. Never qualified for trials. We had ups and downs, which is tough too, because for every time you get a few weeks of just non-result or negative, you got to move on to the next thing, because clearly it's not working. And at one point, right before Christmas, I'll never forget, because she had started to gain weight because the masses were kind of taking control. And all of a sudden, the weight came back down, noticeably, so it was hard not to be a little hopeful in those moments. But it took 30 days from that just came to a screeching halt. And then it was from there, from January straight through to June, it was an onslaught of just bad news. And I honestly don't understand how she's able to just take it and then be like, okay, well, what's next? And it was every single time. And literally to 2 days prior to losing her, this was the conversation type that we were having. Came to a point where things were going, we were running point with multiple hospitals having Zoom calls with just making sure second and third opinions were agreeing with what we wanted to try. And, some of the top minds were in agreement. So we thought, we're in the best hands. But it came to a point where end of June, probably first week July 2023, we had another Zoom call. But this is like the worst Zoom call I've ever been on, because it was the one where her doctors got together and basically pleaded her to stop treatment. They're like, Kat, you're just torturing yourself, poisoning yourself. They're like, you might have a week, you might have 6 months, go live them, And so I had to, I think watching her take that news was worse than anything else. I don't know. We're in our room. I'll never forget it. And so this is textbook Kat at this point. So she takes it, and we spent that whole day just sitting there in silence, but just there for each other. But I knew what was coming, the next day. It's so what are we going to do? And I love her for it, but I was also trying to protect her just from more pain, and from, it had been so much. And, which is crazy to say, by the way, because up until this point in the story, she's walking around, she's doing things. She was literally dialing into work most days to try and contribute in some capacity. So we start looking into these more off, out of the box centers. You've probably heard of them, stuff out in Scottsdale and everything else that they do. Some kind of wacky stuff, but you read about some miracle stories, and we were down to just that as our options. And so mid-July, we hadn't spoken to our radiation oncologist in quite some time, and we got a random phone call from her. And she says, I just spoke to someone come out of a trial out of Toronto. They do entire organ radiation. So it's not targeted spot treatment on one mass. It's a whole organ. Because if someone like Kat, who was about to go into liver failure, they're if we can downsize all the masses in the liver, that's buying the body a ton of time. And so again, true to her nature, she's like, sign me up, let's go. And so it was a Thursday. On Friday, we got USC and Keck to agree that she was suitable for the trial. By Monday, we had our appointment scheduled to go to Torrance, who they're going to do it locally for us, and do the radiation. And this was the start of the end, if you will, because that Monday, she was sitting right here, and she'd been sitting right here since the day prior, because the day prior, Peanut decided to curl up on her lap and pass away himself. And I almost forget about that component sometimes, but she was just crushed. But anyways, she was right here. And all she had to do was just get up and go to the appointment, get through the front door. And that's the day where she got up and realized that her legs weren't going to hold her up anymore. Something happened overnight that she was no longer able to walk. So I called the doctor, who was expecting us in 20 minutes to do the radiation on the entire liver. And I said, look, I can't get her there right now, but I also want to be careful about what I tell you, because I don't want to lose her candidacy for this treatment. And to be fair, she goes, Jamy, if you can get her here, we'll do it. So I basically called my father, who lives less than a couple hours away. He helped me get her out of the house, into the car, to the hospital, and she got through the treatment just like a champ. It was one of the coolest moments. And looking back on it, it's almost like people kind of knew it was her last ditch effort, but she was just a champ in the room. And it's crazy that she was not walking, but kind of having conversations and upbeat and everything. They told us how bad it would be, though, for the 4 or 5 days to come, because you radiate an entire organ, it's going to swell and it's going to be brutal. So we had actually engaged hospice So our doctors told us to do this kind of a hack, I guess, because you can keep her home, but they're authorized to do whatever is needed here, as opposed to running back and forth for things so that way she can lay in bed, keep the medication going. You don't have to worry about feeding her for 4 or 5 days because they can do that via IV. So we had the whole plan. She was supposed to come home and suffer for a few days, but then we were going to go back and see what would happen. By the time she went to bed that night, she was loopy, and I called the doctor because I've seen body language like this before, and, it's not good. Called the doctor. He says, look, in all fairness, she's going to be in actual shock. Like, the body's just been abused in a way that no body should be taking this kind of abuse. Mm-hmm. Let her sleep it off, keep the meds, make sure she doesn't wake up in pain. When she woke up, her eyes were no longer her eyes in the morning. And it took about 3 hours from that moment where she passed away. And what's so hard is I saw it happening. I called her family, and I could have, panicked and gotten her in an ambulance and back over there and to see what can be done. But I didn't. And I think similarly, it's just like I knew she'd been through enough, and her body clearly was tapping out. So I just let it happen. And I don't regret it. I didn't want to bring more sirens and sort of all of that into her last moments. So I was just here, holding her hand when it happened, and that was kind of it. August 3rd, 2023.
I mean, okay. I'm like, it's hard sometimes when you hear, I know for you telling the story, just for that amount of that quickly is what I'll say. But just how you dealt with it and saying goodbye the way that you did was such a selfless act. And I think you're aware of that, right? That she needed to be free, right? Both of them needed to be free. I mean, and then the dog, I'm sorry, if there's no God and nothing, there's no way that the dog would have gone with her. So, I mean, there's pieces of the story that are it makes us all angry that I know both of you are, I'm sure, still pissed. Grief goes on forever. I have news. I mean, that's the thing about grief. It's people think, oh, well, and this is fresh for both of you, but you can both speak to this. A year, right? A little over a year for both of you. And
today,
2 almost.
Today is 22 months.
Okay, today. 22 months. And Jamy, how long for you?
So a year and a half.
Year and a half. But the way that people around you, I'll say, just expect you to be oh, it's been a year. Okay, so let's snap out of it and go to a bar. That's not how it works, right?
Yeah. And I think especially, we are so lucky to have such supportive family and friends, but I do think, and even acquaintances or strangers when they hear a story, but I do think also a lot of people go, oh, you're in a new relationship. No. Everything must be better. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a package. You're okay, and then this happened and now everything's gone. No, it's gonna keep going. Jamy, I know that was so hard to share, and both of you, I know that these stories are really hard to share, but I know there's listeners out there that have gone through things like this. I mean, there's got to be somebody that can relate to this. The piece of this with colon cancer that I want to go back to is, how old was Kat?
36.
Okay. So did it run in her family? Was there any history? It was just a random, both things were both random things that just don't happen, right? That's what it seems like.
I mean, and I think you had asked me before, I don't know if I answered you, so I apologize, but Jason was also 36, which is even that, the similarity of Kat and Jason being the same age when they died. And 36 is young, I mean, and so quick in hindsight for everything that happened with Kat. And, Jason was different. Jason's was a traumatic and, in the grand scheme of things, very sudden death that happened from being perfectly fine to not. But yeah, it's hard to just digest it when hearing Jamy say Kat's whole story in its entirety. It is unfair. It feels really unfair.
Can I ask you something else? And then I kind of want to take a shift. But Jamy, Vanessa shares, like, women in general, like we're just sharers. We talk about, like, I mean, my poor husband has to hear like he's like, dude, I really need to hear that, Meghan. Like, I tell him everything and he's like, okay. But men have a way harder time dealing with their emotions and grief. And so when I do get men coming on and they're like, I'm going to share this story. This is the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to me in my life. I just want you to know, like, how grateful I am to you, because a lot of times I have a hard time getting men being willing to share this. And part of the thing that I talk about is in suicide prevention is like the suicide rate of men is like quadruple. I don't know the exact statistic of women, because we're able to, like, talk about things and process things, and we're really shitty to each other, women, but we also, like, are great to each other in other ways, right? Don't you agree, Vanessa? So I just, like, want to reiterate how grateful I am to you both, but Jamy, that you shared that and we're so, like, real, because that's really hard,
It's I will say, I mean, it's things like this. It's, there's a lot out there between friends and family, and if you look for it, you will find it, whether it's a social group, a grief group, whatever it is. This doesn't just happen. You know what I mean? Like, having her and being able to talk about this whenever we want is something truly special, kind of a superpower, is what we call it sometimes. But the stuff between the hospitals and socially and all the groups, those are all tickets to be able to talk about these things. And, I understand not wanting to right away. I didn't. I think one of the themes for me quickly, where everything happened, I was with my wife and my dog for 17 years. And then in the same week, I lost both of them. And I'm sitting here in this house, no person to talk to like I had been for this whole time, no jingly noise walking around constantly. It's just, the silence was worse than anything else for so long. Well, for so long. There's a few months. It was never to an extreme, I'll say, but I didn't want to do anything, and I didn't want to share. I didn't want to try things, but that was the hump that I wanted to get over fast, because I know me, and I could have sat there in the darkness for a very long time. But a mixture of, I think, like, even just telling the story, one, they say that you're healing big time every time you actually say it out loud. So I try to believe that that's true. But also, there's a lot in it that helps people. But also, I think Kat would be proud. I don't want to let her down by just sort of admitting defeat just because I'm lonely and, like, scared, So that was a big motivator to kind of get off my ass and just try to find people, try to find, resources and things like that. And they are out there. So thank you for saying that. It is easier to talk about today more so than a year ago. Certainly. Yeah.
Yeah. And something else that struck me that you just said is, like, it's not, nobody would have an easy time with this. It's the fact that you just, like, kept going, and you didn't, you were, like, day by day, like, I'm sure in the beginning you were like, how do I even, like, get out of bed? Like, the shock of it all. But something that I learned from, and I'll use my best friend, I like to talk about her the most because I feel like she's the closest to me. But she was such a good person. Like, so she was the most amazing person I've ever met. And I can be a real shit, but I also was like always the bad. I always joke that I was the bad, like, girl on the shoulder, and she was like the angel on the shoulder when we were growing up. And so when I lost her the way that I did, and we all lost Julie, I always think, well, I'm going to take these pieces of her and try my best to like be a better person. I want to be like Julie. I want to like keep going and like do something like to make her proud of me, because I know she's with me all the time. So when you both share that story, your separate stories of like losing the person you like, the love of your life, you know, at that time, it just really makes me think like how proud they would be of you that you both were able to go on and that you took pieces of them. And then I would like to know, like, for the sake of time, not to make this so fast, but I think this part of the story is so important, that you lived 2 doors away. Like, how did you even meet? Like, that's the craziest part of this story for me.
It is crazy.
It's, so like I said, we moved in here in the middle of the chaos, and it was battle stations right away. So there was none of this like, let's go meet the neighbors and let's have them over. And to this day, I don't really know as many as I probably should, but you know, we were really keeping to ourselves. And if we left the house, it was for, you know, purposes of the hospital and that sort of thing. The only thing I would do is walk Peanut around the block, because he had to go out like 5 times a day. So if anyone ever saw me, it was walking him. And that the first time we ever spoke to each other, I don't think she spoke to me, but she said Peanut was cute. And we got our names. That's kind of like the extent of it. So that would have been...
I think I was just sitting out in the front yard with, you know, my 3-year-old at the time, and then the baby who was like 2 months old, and Jamy had walked by with Peanut, and my son was like, can I pet your dog, you know? And so we met Peanut, and then thereafter we'd see each other here and there, and it was just like a wave, like, oh, hey, how are you? You know, like same thing for me. I was crawling at that time. I was in such survival mode. If I got out of bed, which I obviously had to because the kids, but it was like, okay, let's go outside and get a little bit of vitamin D, and then we're back inside. Just again, surviving. So
plus you had a newborn baby. So like, how did you even do? I mean, I don't even know how to begin with that, like of going through the grief process. That was so horrifically hard, the way you lost him so quickly.
Meghan, it's like, it's hard. And maybe that's a bigger conversation because not for me, it was the grief of losing Jason, but then having terrible postpartum on top of that.
Yeah.
Which, you know, as a woman, it's like so hard. You know, I was trying to, again, I was in survival mode. Some days I still am, to be quite honest. But yes, so Jamy then had been walking by with Peanut every now and then. And so it was just a quick like wave, because when I did meet him, though, I believe he had said, oh, I live 2 doors down. He either said me and my wife or we. So I knew, I was like, oh, okay, like, that's nice. Like, I met somebody like nice and kind of similar to my age in the neighborhood. And then what happened?
Well, so that was earlier in the year, probably.
Yes.
So everything you were happened. Still dealing with like her being sick. Okay. So you were probably going outside in shock and dealing with all the emotions.
Oh, yeah. I was like walking down. No, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just taking care of business and walking back in. We deal with everything with Kat, you know, and then the months to follow with the services. We did a service in California, but also one back in Connecticut. But those like 3 months to follow, I did nothing. I didn't go back to work right away. I just was trying to do my best and like take care of myself a little, but everyone's like, just feel it, be in it, you know. I don't know. I was alone and I wasn't very good at taking advice either. But one of the things, and I would say this to anyone, is for me, I can build off momentum, right? So one of the things I was trying to do for myself was create little wins. And so one of my big wins was like, you know what? We need some food in here. Like, go to the damn grocery store. It's only like 300 yards from here. Like, go do something, right? So that day, I went to the store, and I had been wanting to go talk to her because her mother-in-law had put a sign out front of her house. One of these, like, you know, rest in peace with a name and a date and everything. So I knew something awful had happened over there, but I hadn't spoken to her about it, hadn't seen her to talk about it. So I had this inkling of like, this is strange, but like, I feel like if I run into her one day, we should talk, because now I'm alone. She's alone. We're neighbors. Like, I should be there to offer some help or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not a very like outgoing person. I'm not the one that, you know, walk across the room and get a phone number, let's just say. But one day I'm coming back from the grocery store, my big win, and she's literally out front in her yard on a blanket with the boys, just sitting there. And I'll never forget, I parked in the garage, didn't even bring the groceries inside. I just walked over there, and I was like, something to the extent of...
But I'll say, he was walking over, and I hadn't seen him in a few months, given with everything that had just gone on in his life. Mm-hmm. So out of my peripheral vision, I could see him walking over, but I noticed there was no dog. Peanut was not with him. And I thought, oh my gosh, the dog must have passed away. You know, he had told me Peanut was older when we met. And so while he's walking over, I'm trying to like think like, okay, what can I say? And so, yeah, he came over and he's like, Vanessa, right? And Jack and Cooper. And I was like, hey, he's like, was so sweet and had said like, I wanted to come over and apologize that I haven't given you condolences, you know, earlier, but I know something's happened and I just wanted to say I'm sorry. And I said, you know, it's okay. You know, no problem. I totally understand. I've actually thought about you. I haven't seen you and Peanut walking out in a while. And I think it just came out, you know, and he said, yeah, Peanut died 3 months ago and my wife died 3 days later. And it was just...
What was that moment like? I mean, because it must have been like pretty insane to meet somebody that was so freshly in grief and could relate to you like that. Was it almost like freeing, kind of?
In a way, it was. I mean, I was all over the place, though, because I was definitely seeking some help.
Yeah.
I was like, she knows. Like, I saw the date on the sign, right? So I was like, she's like 7 months into this, 9 months into. So like, I don't know, maybe we can just be there for each other. I don't know. And so, yeah, I was happy I got it out because that was fresh, right? I hadn't been having too many conversations like that. Wanted to put myself out there just as a resource for her. She's right there with 2 young ones. I'm like, make yourself useful, you know?
Yeah, and I think it had been 9 months out for me since Jason had passed. And at the time, I had just begun going to this grief group, Kelsey Chittick.
Kelsey was on. Hi, Kelsey. If she listens, she was on the podcast. Yeah, I love Kelsey.
She's been like instrumental in my life and my grieving process and the journey I've been on. And she had started along with this other great girlfriend, now who I can call great girlfriend. And they were like, we need to start something for like younger widows and widowers. And so that was mine right away. I was like, do you have support? Where are you from? I was like on a high of finally feeling like I got some reprieve of people who understood what I was going through. And I knew he would need that. And so he was like, I'm from Canada and the East Coast. And I was like, here's Kelsey's number, call her. And
that's right. She goes, who's staying with you? I was like, no one. She goes, where's your family? I'm like, far. You know, but I'm so thankful for how immediately just kind she was to me, because it was, what can I do? Are you in a group? Are you seeing anyone? Are you in therapy? Like, what are you doing? And it was just instantly sharing this. And she could have just been like, I'm so sorry. I'm here if you need me, you know? which is kind of the only expectation I had. But she was just right away, she started being helpful. And that's one of the things I can never thank her enough for.
Something I would love to know is, do you feel like, I mean, again, I'll get into the spiritual component of it, but like, I don't know. I just don't believe in coincidences in life. Like I hate, everyone's like, I hate it when you say everything happens for a reason. Like people get mad, but right. I mean, I know, especially when you go through loss, you want to be like, shut up, you idiot, like, and go away. But I also do believe in that to an extent, because I have to know when these kinds of things happen, like you're two doors apart. There's so many things that in this story and in your lives that make me think that maybe Jason and Kat would have wanted you both to be together and help each other, and they're happy about it. That's at least me not knowing them feel that way.
Yeah. I think Jamy and I both have our own versions of spirituality and how much we believe in signs. And, I do believe, though, that nobody is brought into your life or put into your life for no reason, And just like a little backstory for like us is when we had to move out of our last place, when we moved 2 doors down from Jamy, that was the 18th place I had looked at. Literally, I was like, this is crazy. And it was the one and only place Jason looked at. I remember calling him. I was like, it has a rooftop. He's like, all right, I'm coming over. Let's just sign the lease. And yeah, I mean, it really feels like all things fell in line. And I've said this before, but sometimes I feel like Jason's up wherever he is, almost orchestrating things for me and the boys in our life before I even know that they're bound to happen. And I'm so thankful for that. And I can only hope that Kat and Jason are up there having a grand old time, orchestrating things down here for the good of Jamy and I. I think we'll never really, really know until it's our turn. But yeah, for me, a medium, I've seen a couple since Jason passed, but a medium actually went to my mother-in-law, Jason's mom, and had said, who I've never met, but had said, please tell Vanessa that Jason really just wants me, if you can communicate to her, that he'll be looking out for her and the boys for the rest of his life. And I feel that. I really feel that, I don't have signs like hummingbirds and butterflies coming to my window, but there's been things that I'm like, wow, thanks, Jay,
Yeah.
And I definitely think Jamy is one of them.
Jamy, what do you think about that? Do you like have some kind of like feeling or like signs that Kat's with you?
And it's, I think, maybe less so signs. I think timing is most important.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what things look like for me if I don't walk over to Vanessa on that day last year. I'd probably be fine. I just mentally, emotionally, I was not headed in the right place. And I feel like, a Kat type moment where she'd been like, you need to get out of this funk now, or you're going to be maybe too late. I feel like stuff like that, where it was not in my character to walk over to someone new in a low point of my life and just sort of put myself out there, but I did it. I'm proud that I did, stuff like that. I have a cat on my shoulder full time, which is, super helpful. Like we grew up together. We were babies when we met, and from 20 to 36, we became adults together. So like I know what her take would be on something, and she's definitely an advocate, feisty and had no problem voicing something if she's so pleased. And those are the moments where I lean on her. So like when I'm dealing with something, I can tap into that. And those are the moments that I'm almost happy to, because one, I know that she would or would not approve, but it's nice knowing, and it's nice to have that hit me every time I'm sort of balancing that. Yeah. So it's less so signs, but it's moments and it's timing for me, for sure.
Do you like for my widows and widowers that might be listening right now? And like, I mean, your story is really I mean, again, you don't put a big bow on this at the end, right? We talked about that in the beginning where you're like, okay, so now I met someone and I'm not grieving. That's part of life. And like I've told you my story, one of my stories is you never stop grieving. You just don't. It takes different shapes and forms. Like I could be watching a movie. I'm sure you both can relate to this, or a song will come on and it doesn't matter like what I'm doing, but I'll just start crying. And it doesn't matter what day of the week it is or what time, or, my dad's been dead. I'm a dinosaur. I'm very old now for a really long time. And I'll see something and I'll be like, oh my God. And I'll go down that rabbit hole, where it's like tapping you on the shoulder. So it's always with you, but it takes different form over time. What do you think about like if I have widows or widowers listening, like some good advice that you've learned, because this is still so fresh, about like not feeling the guilt and the shame of being okay with meeting someone else. Can you talk about that?
For me, I think there's like a preservation stage of grief. And I think it's a matter of how long you sort of stay there, because it took me a matter of months to sort of understand that every moment ever, every experience ever that I had and got with Kat, that's mine to keep forever. And no one could take it from me. Doesn't matter if I lose my own mind and I forget these things still happened and they happened with us and I have them and they're mine. So there came a day, and yes, meeting someone probably helped me over that fence, but when you exit sort of preservation, like, oh, I can't touch anything, I can't paint anything, she liked it like that. Like, if that's where you are still, I think, you have some work to do still. But eventually you realize, you know what, I can take this plant and put it over here and she'll respect it. And I'm making that choice for me, right? Even if you think that they're watching down on you, which is one of the things you have to kind of learn to live with, because you want to make them proud, but you have to take steps for yourself. And so I think a combination of all of those things, you exit preservation and you realize that it doesn't matter what you do. You're not doing it to disrespect your past. You're trying to live your today and trying to live a life that you're proud of and that your person will be proud of. And that's all you can really do.
I love that. Vanessa, do you have anything to say on that?
I mean, I agree with everything he just said. And I think something that Jane mentioned before was, he has like Kat permanently on his shoulder. And as you mentioned before, creating this companionship and relationship with whatever your grief looks like, the loss of a spouse, parent, child. But for me, where I have 2 kids and Jamie and Kat didn't have kids, some days are really hard, being a parent and being a parent of young kids. And so, there's a lot of days that, I'll be laying in bed and I tap into just like talking to Jason, asking his advice, and Jamie is so in our lives now, and he's been so amazing with the boys. And Jamie's also just an extraordinary human being that he knows and takes such pride in saying, like, I want to know everything about Jason because I want to be able to share that with the boys and tell them how amazing their dad was and answer any questions they may have. And he's never trying to take the place of Jason. But it takes a really special person, I think in our dynamic with each other. It's like, I hear him talk about Kat and I just think like, she sounds like such a badass. Like, I wish I could have met her, and I know the same for Jamie when I talk about Jason. It's nothing but complimentary to the person he was. And that is hard, It's hard because even if you're, holding a safe space for each other, I think there's just like a level of respect too. I think for Jamie and I look back at our relationship and even just talking to you, in the beginning, it was so much of trauma bonding. And I think that for any of your listeners, it's so important if you're able to have that with anyone. It doesn't need to be, this turned into a romantic thing and it evolved to where we are now, but it wasn't like that in the beginning. The first time we went to dinner, it was just so nice to sit there and talk to somebody who understood it. And for me, that was such a relief, because although I had my family and friends and fellow widows, to just sit there and have somebody just actively listen to me and not try to diminish my grief or where I was at was just, I don't know, a breath of fresh air. And it still is. It still is for me 22 months out.
Do you think too, like in closing, because I know this is going long for you both and I'm sorry that it is, but I think your stories are going to help so many of my listeners, especially this time of year, because we talked in the beginning about the holidays and like traditions and that kind of stuff. Like, do you find it like you kind of want to like shut down this time of year, or are you finding like, okay, well now, I mean, I love, Jamy, that you said like you move the bowl. It's like taking like little baby steps, you know, of like making new traditions and being okay with like being with her boys. I mean, so for like listeners out there, like, can you give like any advice on that? Like this time of year, you know, it's really hard to go through grief at the holidays.
What I would say is you have to you can't fight it, right? Grief has its own agenda, I think, as we've all learned, right? But it's going to hit you and it's not really up to you. So it's a matter of what do you do in that moment? And you might try to fight it a little bit, but you have to just let it be and not let it own you, but just accept it, think about it. You know, those are the moments where it's best to tap into a lifeline or, you know, a resource that you have, or call your therapist, whatever it is. Or even if you're going to take a walk.
Yeah, even get outside, put your feet into the ground. Yeah. And I think it gets dark earlier. It's the holidays. It's everybody with their families and doing the fun things that you may not have anymore. And it's hard, you know? And I think though, for me at this time last year, it was just getting outside, which in the time, maybe I was like, I don't want to get the kids dressed. I don't want to get dressed. But I never once regretted getting out and taking a walk with fresh air or in the sun or whatever that looks like, you know, it helps.
I would say too, is don't force anything in any direction, because it's in your first year, especially maybe year 2, 3, 4, even, you might think, oh, well, we did this for Christmas the last 20 years. We have to do that. We have to get the whole family on a plane and go to Vail. Like, no, you don't, right? The ski resorts will be there next year. Mm-hmm. Do what's best for you in that moment. Don't force. If you want to do it and you can and it makes sense and it feels good, fantastic. You know, all the power to you. But I would say don't force the agenda. I think, you know, it's time to just, like, for me, my family is not local to here. I made a choice, like right now for Thanksgiving. I'm like, I don't want to be on planes and trains and automobiles right now. Like, I want to be in my home and be around. And if I can do some things locally, great. But I want to focus on this and here and now and see what happens after. But don't force is what I would say.
Yeah, I love that. I can't thank you guys enough. We live close, so like we're now friends. I hope you know that.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, I know that this is going to help so many people, and I'm so honored that you shared your stories of Kat and Jason. And I honestly like feel like they know each other up there. I don't know. I'm that person that believes that stuff. I feel like I have to. And that's just me. I always say, I feel like they're just in the next room. And that's kind of what gets me through my stuff. So everybody has something that worked for them, and that's okay. It's whatever worked for you to get to the next day. So if you're listening, you're going to be okay. And I want you to know that, like, it's going to be okay. And if you need to sit in a dark room for 3 days straight and cry, then do it. So in closing, thank you again for coming on. I could make this a 3-hour podcast, I think, but I don't think either of you have that in you. And I know I don't, but no, in all seriousness, I want to close with this. So for the past like 3 or 4 years, I've been taking this lady to mass. Her name's Pat. And I go to Sunday mass. I don't go every week, but I go like, you know, several times a month. And I would take her to mass. And I actually met her after 2020 when I was like in a really bad place. And so I was like, what can I do to be a better person and like cheer myself up? And P.S. you guys, I'm no saint. Like, ask around town. Half the town hates me. But I started going like, what can I do? Like, I want to do something. So I said, oh, I'll volunteer to take an elderly person to mass on Sundays. And so I met this lady and we genuinely became friends, like really good friends. Like I would talk to her and every Sunday I saw her, I'm going to tear up. She would make me smile. Like she was really an incredible person. And I would give her a hard time. I'd be like, oh my God, you're being so slow. Hurry up out of the cart. Like I would tease her, to like get into church. And, she had this birthday party for her 90th. She had this mass and she shared this poem. It's called like Getting on the Train or The Train. And it's about all the people that you meet throughout your life. And like, there's certain stops. So you're going to lose your parents and that's going to be hard. And you're going to go through loss and you're going to go through all these things. But how lucky and fortunate we are to meet people on the train of life. And so, Pat passed away 2 days ago and I've been really upset, like genuinely upset, like more upset than I ever thought. Like I went and I saw her in hospice at the nursing home last week and I just saw her clutching her rosary and I just knew like this woman went straight to heaven. So I really believe that. And if she's listening, I'm going to really freaking miss her because she was the greatest, but she lived 92 amazing years. And I just want to close with that story. I think it's fitting for you both coming on, like how important it is. Life is short, everyone. Like live your life. We never know what tomorrow brings and you do your best and you try and be kind and you share your stories and you make your friends and you'll get through these holidays if you're grieving, just like all of us will. It's just one day. I like to say that when I went through my first Christmas without my dad, it's just one day. You get through that one day and then like what the next day, nobody cares about December 26th. You just go shopping and return stuff. So anyways, thanks again to you both. Everyone, keep going. You matter. Your story matters. Thank you again.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.